Before we dive into this forbidden knowledge that's been hidden from you for thousands of years, I want to ask you something. What time is it where you are right now? And where are you watching this from? I'm asking because time and location are not accidents, my friend. The fact that you're here right now, in this exact moment, watching this video, it's not random. It's not coincidence. It's synchronicity calling you to remember something you've always known, but were taught to forget. And your shadow self. That dark, mysterious part of you that society told you to suppress, to hide, to be ashamed of. It's been screaming for your attention, trying to show you the way to unlimited power, infinite wisdom, and the key to unlocking your true multidimensional existence. You've probably been told your entire life that there are parts of yourself you need to fix, parts you need to hide, aspects of your personality that are bad or wrong or unacceptable. But what if I told you that's the biggest lie that's ever been programmed into your consciousness? What if the very parts of yourself you've been running from, suppressing, denying, and burying deep in your psyche are actually the golden keys to accessing powers and abilities that the ancient mystery schools spent lifetimes trying to master? Every single time you feel anger and push it down, every time you experience jealousy and shame yourself for it, every time you have a dark thought and immediately try to replace it with something positive, you're literally rejecting the most powerful teacher you'll ever have in this lifetime. Your shadow self and the controllers, the systems, the institutions that run this matrix we call reality know this secret. They know that if you ever integrated your shadow, if you ever stopped fighting yourself and started embracing every single aspect of your being, you would become unstoppable. You would break free from their programming, their control, their manipulation, and that terrifies them because a human being who has mastered their shadow is a human being who cannot be enslaved. The ancient Egyptians knew this truth. They encoded it in their mysteries, in the story of Osiris being torn apart and put back together. In the journey through the Duat, the underworld, where the initiate had to face every single demon, every single fear, every single rejected part of themselves before they could achieve immortality and become one with the gods. The Tibetan Buddhists understood it too, which is why their most advanced practitioners don't just meditate on light and love and bliss. They practice chod, the cutting through practice, where they literally invite demons, spirits, and the darkest aspects of consciousness to devour them, to consume them completely, because they understand that what you resist persists and what you embrace transforms. The Hermetic tradition, those ancient teachings that influenced everything from alchemy to modern psychology, spoke of the principle of polarity, that everything has two poles, two aspects, and you cannot have light without dark. You cannot have consciousness without unconsciousness. You cannot have a self without a shadow. And the secret, the forbidden knowledge they don't want you to understand, is that these aren't opposites fighting each other. They're dance partners, they're two halves of the same whole. And when you finally stop trying to destroy one half and instead learn to integrate them, to merge them, to become the union of opposites, that's when you access what the alchemists called the Philosopher's Stone, what the mystics called enlightenment, what I call your true power. But here's what they never tell you in all those spiritual communities, in all those self-help books, in all those love and light teachings that dominate the wellness industry right now. Your shadow isn't just made up of your negative emotions or your bad qualities. No, no, no. Your shadow contains gold. It contains your deepest creativity, your most authentic power, your raw sexual energy, your primal life force, your ability to set boundaries, your capacity for righteous anger, your warrior spirit, your wild, untamed nature that refuses to be domesticated by society's expectations. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who revolutionized our understanding of the psyche, He discovered this truth through his own dark night of the soul, through his own descent into what he called the confrontation with the unconscious. And he realized that the shadow isn't the enemy. The shadow is the gold mine. It's the treasure chest of everything you sacrifice to be accepted, to be loved, to be safe in a world that demands conformity. And every single quality you pushed into the shadow, every single aspect of yourself you denied because your parents, your teachers, your religious leaders, your culture told you it was wrong. That energy didn't disappear. It didn't evaporate. It went into the basement of your psyche where it's been growing, festering, gaining power. And now it runs your life from behind the scenes like a puppet master, pulling strings you can't even see. This is why you sabotage yourself right when you're about to succeed. This is why you attract the same toxic relationships over and over again. This is why you have addictions you can't break and patterns you can't change and behaviors that make you ask yourself, why do I keep doing this when I know better? It's your shadow, and it will continue to run your life, to sabotage you, to keep you small and stuck and suffering until you turn around and face it, until you descend into your own underworld. Until you do what every hero in every mythology throughout human history has had to do. Go into the cave, face the dragon, and retrieve the treasure. The ancient Greeks understood this journey. They encoded it in the myth of Persephone descending into the underworld, in Orpheus traveling to Hades to retrieve his beloved, in Hercules completing his 12 labors, which were really 12 initiations into different aspects of the shadow. The Sumerians told the story of Inanna descending through 7 gates, removing a piece of her clothing and her power at each gate until she stood naked and powerless before her dark sister Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld, and only through that complete surrender, that total vulnerability, that willingness to face everything she had rejected and denied could she be reborn and return to the surface world transformed, carrying the wisdom of both the upper and lower worlds, the light and the dark, the conscious and the unconscious. The Native American traditions speak of this too, in their vision quests where young people would go into the wilderness alone, without food or water, to face their fears and receive guidance from the spirit world. The Aboriginal Australians have their walkabout, a rite of passage where one must journey into the harsh desert and confront everything within themselves to emerge as an adult, fully integrated, fully alive, fully awake. And the common thread through all of these traditions, through every mystery school, through every genuine spiritual path that's ever existed is this simple truth. You cannot skip the shadow work. You cannot bypass the darkness. You cannot transcend what you haven't integrated. And anyone who tells you that you can just think positive thoughts and affirm your way to enlightenment is selling you a lie, a comfortable lie, a profitable lie, but a lie nonetheless. Now, let me tell you exactly what happens when you start doing real shadow work, when you stop running from the darkness and start turning toward it with curiosity, with compassion, with courage, because this is where the ancient technique I'm about to share with you will literally change everything about how you experience reality. First, you have to understand that your shadow formed through a process psychologists call disowning, which means that as a child, you came into this world as a complete being, totally authentic, totally free, expressing every emotion without filter, without shame, without self-consciousness. You cried when you were sad, you screamed when you were angry, you laughed with pure joy, you explored your body without embarrassment, you said exactly what you thought, you took what you wanted, you were wild and free and completely yourself. But then something happened. The people around you, the society you were born into started giving you messages, sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle, about which parts of you were acceptable and which parts were not. Maybe you were told big boys don't cry. So you learned to suppress your sadness and your vulnerability. and those qualities went into your shadow. Maybe you were punished for being angry, told that anger is bad, that nice girls don't get mad. So your healthy aggression, your ability to protect yourself, your capacity for setting boundaries all went into the shadow. Maybe you were rewarded for being quiet and obedient and punished for being loud and wild. So your authentic self-expression, your creativity, your spontaneity all got locked away in the darkness. Maybe you grew up in a religious household where sexuality was shameful, where your body was something to be controlled and denied rather than celebrated and enjoyed. So your sexual energy, your life force, your connection to the most powerful creative energy in the universe got buried in the shadow. Maybe you were praised for being smart and criticized for being emotional. So you learned to live in your head and you disowned your heart, your intuition, your connection to the feeling realm. That's actually where all your power lives. And here's the thing that most people don't realize. Here's the secret that changes everything. Whatever you pushed into your shadow doesn't just affect you, it affects everyone around you through a process Jung called projection, which means that the qualities you can't see in yourself, you will see in others, you will project them onto other people, and then you will have strong emotional reactions to those people without understanding why. This is why you might have an inexplicable hatred for someone who's too confident, if you've suppressed your own confidence into the shadow. This is why you might be triggered by people who express anger freely if you've disowned your own anger. This is why you might be judgmental of people who are too sexual, or too wild, or too emotional, if those are the exact qualities you were taught to suppress in yourself. And the most insidious part of this whole mechanism is that your shadow doesn't just make you project onto others, it makes you attract people who will play out your shadow for you. Which is why you keep ending up in relationships with angry people if you've disowned your own anger. Why you keep attracting manipulative people if you've suppressed your own capacity for healthy manipulation and strategy. Why you keep finding yourself surrounded by narcissists if you've buried your own healthy self-love and self-interest in the shadow. Your external reality is literally mirroring your internal shadow, showing you through the people and situations you attract exactly what you need to integrate. But instead of seeing it as a message, as a teaching, as an invitation to wholeness, most people just blame others, play the victim, and wonder why life keeps happening to them instead of understanding that life is happening for them. That every single challenging person and difficult situation is a gift from your higher self, from the universe, from whatever you want to call that intelligence that's guiding your evolution, showing you precisely where you need to do the work, where you need to bring light into darkness, where you need to retrieve the lost parts of yourself that are waiting in the shadow to be welcomed home. The ancient Egyptians had a practice, a forbidden technique that was only taught to the highest initiates in the mystery schools of Karnak and Dendera. And this technique, this is exactly what I'm going to share with you now. And I need you to understand that this is not theory, this is not philosophy, this is practical magic. This is a method that if you actually do it, not just think about it or intellectually understand it, but actually practice it consistently, it will unlock abilities, powers, and levels of consciousness you didn't even know were possible. The Egyptians called this practice the Night Sea Journey, and it was based on their understanding that every single night when Ra, the sun god, descended below the horizon, he had to travel through the Duat, the underworld, where he faced 12 hours of darkness, 12 trials, 12 encounters with demons and monsters and aspects of chaos that tried to prevent him from reaching dawn. But here's the secret. Ra needed this journey. He couldn't just skip the night and go straight to morning. He had to descend into darkness, face every shadow, integrate every challenge, and emerge transformed, reborn each morning as the new sun. And this wasn't just mythology. This was an instruction manual for human consciousness. This was the ancient Egyptians telling us that we are the sun god, that our consciousness must make this same journey, that we cannot skip the darkness and go straight to enlightenment. We must ascend. We must face our shadows. We must integrate what we find there. And when we do, we're reborn as something far more powerful than we were before. So here's exactly how you do this practice. Here's the ancient Egyptian technique adapted for modern consciousness that will allow you to access your shadow self, integrate its power, and unlock abilities that have been dormant within you since childhood. First, you need to create what the Egyptians called sacred space, which means you need a time and place where you won't be disturbed, where you feel safe enough to encounter whatever arises from the unconscious. This could be your bedroom late at night. It could be a quiet corner of your home. It could be anywhere that feels protected and private. And you're going to sit or lie down comfortably. And you're going to begin by closing your eyes and taking several deep breaths, but not those shallow breaths you normally take. I'm talking about breaths that go all the way down into your belly, breaths that activate your diaphragm, breaths that signal to your nervous system that it's safe to relax, safe to let go, safe to descend beneath the surface of your everyday consciousness into the deeper waters of the unconscious mind. As you breathe, you're going to set an intention. And this is crucial because intention is what directs consciousness. Intention is what opens the doorway between the conscious and unconscious mind. So you're going to say either out loud or silently in your mind something like, I am ready to meet my shadow self. I am ready to face what I've been running from. I am ready to retrieve the parts of myself I've disowned. I welcome whatever arises with curiosity and compassion. And I know that whatever I encounter is ultimately a part of me seeking integration, seeking love, seeking to come home. And just that act, just that willingness to turn toward rather than away from your darkness is already revolutionary, because most people spend their entire lives running, avoiding, denying, and you're about to do the opposite. You're about to become a spiritual warrior. You're about to do what the Tibetan Buddhists call feeding your demons, which doesn't mean you're evil or possessed. It means you're recognizing that the parts of you that you've starved of attention, that you've rejected and exiled, have become like hungry ghosts in your psyche, desperate for acknowledgement, desperate for love, desperate to be seen. Once you've set your intention and you're in a deeply relaxed state, you're going to begin a visualization practice that the Egyptian initiates used in the temples, and you're going to imagine yourself standing at the entrance of a dark cave or descending a staircase that leads down into the earth, into the underworld of your own psyche. With each step you take, or each moment you move deeper into this cave, you're going deeper into trance, deeper into the unconscious, deeper into the realm where your shadow lives. And you might feel fear arise, you might feel resistance, you might feel that voice in your head that says, this is stupid, or this isn't working, or I should stop now. And that's your ego. That's the part of you that's been protecting you from this encounter. That's been standing guard at the threshold saying, don't go there, it's not safe, turn back. But you're going to acknowledge that fear, thank it for trying to protect you, and then you're going to keep going anyway because you understand now that what's on the other side of that fear is your power, your freedom, your wholeness. As you go deeper into this inner underworld, you're going to ask a question. You're going to call out either silently or in your imagination and say, show me my shadow. Reveal to me what I've been denying. Let me see what I cannot see in myself. And then you wait. You sit in that darkness, in that uncertainty, in that not knowing, and you remain open to whatever emerges, because your shadow will reveal itself to you. Maybe not in the way you expect, maybe not in a clear vision or a voice, but in some way. You might see an image, a symbol, a figure, a younger version of yourself, an animal, a monster, a demon. Anything is possible because the unconscious speaks in the language of symbols, in metaphor, in imagery that bypasses your rational mind and speaks directly to your soul. When something appears, when you encounter your shadow in whatever form it takes, here's what you do not do. You do not run. You do not judge. You do not try to destroy it or make it go away. You do not try to send it to the light, or banish it or protect yourself from it. Because all of those reactions are just more sophisticated forms of rejection, and rejection is what created the shadow in the first place. Instead, you're going to do something that might feel completely counterintuitive. You're going to approach it. You're going to move toward it with curiosity, with openness, with love, and you're going to ask it questions. You're going to say, "Who are you? What do you want? What do you need? What gift are you bringing me? What quality or power have you been holding for me?" And this is where the magic happens. This is where everything you thought you knew about spirituality gets turned upside down. Because when you actually meet your shadow with love instead of fear, when you actually listen to it instead of trying to fix it or change it or transcend it, something incredible occurs. It transforms, not because you try to transform it, but because the very act of seeing it, acknowledging it, welcoming it home, is itself the transformation. That anger you've been suppressing for decades might reveal itself as your capacity for healthy boundaries, for protecting what you love, for saying no when something violates your values. That jealousy you've been so ashamed of might show itself as your own unlived potential, your own dreams and desires that you've been too afraid to pursue, pointing you toward what you really want in life. That selfishness you were taught to despise might actually be healthy self-love, healthy self-care, the ability to put your own oxygen mask on first so you can actually show up fully for others. That sexuality you've been hiding might be your connection to your life force, your creative power, your ability to generate and manifest in the physical realm. That darkness you've been running from might be your depth, your mystery, your ability to hold space for the suffering of others because you've learned to hold space for your own. The Tibetan Buddhist master Tsultrim, she teaches a practice called feeding your demons that's remarkably similar to this ancient Egyptian technique. And she explains that in Tibetan, the word for demon is du, which literally means that which provokes fear. And she says that our demons, our shadow aspects, are not external entities that possess us, but rather parts of ourselves that have become alienated, exiled, rejected. And they're trying to get our attention the only way they know how. Through symptoms, through sabotage, through suffering, through the same patterns repeating over and over in our lives until we finally turn around and face them. In her practice, you don't just visualize your shadow, you actually ask it what it needs, and then you feed it. You give it what it's asking for, but not in a literal physical way. You feed it energetically, imaginatively. You give it the love, the attention, the acceptance, the belonging it's been starving for. And as you feed it, as you give it what it needs, something miraculous happens. It transforms, it changes shape. It becomes an ally, a teacher, a protector, a source of power rather than a source of suffering. And this isn't just spiritual bypassing or positive thinking or pretending everything is fine. This is actual alchemy. This is the transmutation of lead into gold that the medieval alchemists were really talking about when they spoke of the great work. They weren't trying to turn physical lead into physical gold. They were describing the process of turning the lead of the rejected shadow self into the gold of integrated wholeness, of authentic power, of real spiritual attainment that's not based on denial or suppression or bypassing, but on inclusion, on embracing everything, on becoming so vast that you can hold both light and dark, both angel and demon, both saint and sinner within your consciousness without identifying exclusively with either. Now, I need to tell you something that most spiritual teachers won't say because it's not comfortable. It's not pretty. It's not what people want to hear when they're seeking enlightenment or awakening or whatever label they've attached to their spiritual aspirations. The shadow work never ends. There is no final destination where you've integrated everything and now you're done and you can just float around in bliss for the rest of your life. That's a fantasy. That's spiritual bypassing. That's the ego's attempt to turn even shadow work into another achievement, another box to check, another way to be better than other people who haven't done the work. The truth, the real truth that the ancient mystery schools understood is that life itself is the shadow work. Every challenge is an invitation to integrate. Every person who triggers you is a mirror showing you what you haven't accepted in yourself. Every negative emotion that arises is a messenger carrying information about where you've abandoned yourself, where you've betrayed your truth, where you've made yourself small to fit into someone else's expectations. And the practice isn't to do shadow work once and be done. The practice is to develop a relationship with your shadow, to make it an ongoing dialogue, an ongoing dance, an ongoing process of welcoming home the parts of yourself that have been exiled. And as you do this, as you make this a practice rather than a project, something shifts in your entire experience of reality. You stop seeing the world as divided into good and bad, light and dark, spiritual and unspiritual, and you start seeing everything as consciousness exploring itself, as the divine playing all the roles in the cosmic drama, and you realize that you are that consciousness, you are that divine intelligence, and every single experience you have, every single quality you possess, every single shadow you encounter is just another facet of the infinite jewel of being that you truly are. The Hermetic principle of as above, so below, as within, so without becomes lived truth when you do this work, because you start to see that the macrocosm and the microcosm are mirrors of each other, that the universe is having the same experience you're having, working with its own shadow, integrating its own rejected aspects, and you're not separate from that process. You are that process in human form, and when you integrate your personal shadow, you're actually contributing to the integration of the collective shadow. You're doing work not just for yourself, but for all of humanity, for the entire planetary consciousness that's trying to evolve, to awaken, to remember its true nature. This is why the world is going through such chaos right now, why it feels like everything is falling apart, why darkness seems to be rising to the surface everywhere you look. It's not because evil is winning or because we're doomed or because humanity is going backwards. It's because we are in a collective shadow integration process. The entire species is being forced to look at what we've denied, what we've suppressed, what we've pushed into the collective unconscious for generations. All. The racism, the greed, the violence, the abuse, the trauma, the lies, the corruption, all of it is coming up to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be integrated. And yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it's scary. Yes, it makes you want to look away and go back to sleep and pretend everything is fine. But that's not an option anymore. The universe is calling for integration. The earth is demanding that we grow up as a species. And the only way through is to go through. To face the shadow individually and, collectively, to stop dividing ourselves into good people and bad people, and recognize that we all contain the capacity for both light and dark, for both creation and destruction, for both love and hate, and the question isn't whether we have these capacities. The question is whether we're conscious of them, whether we're taking responsibility for them, whether we're integrating them into wholeness, or continuing to project them onto others, and wonder why the world is such a mess. Let me give you specific examples of how this shadow integration actually shows up in your daily life. Because this isn't just abstract philosophy or mystical theory. This is practical magic that changes how you show up in the world, how you relate to others, how you experience yourself. Let's say you've always struggled with setting boundaries. You're a people pleaser. You say yes when you mean no. You let people walk all over you. You give and give until you're exhausted and resentful, and then you either explode in anger or withdraw in depression. And this pattern has been running your life for as long as you can remember. When you do shadow work around this, when you actually go into that cave and ask, what part of me am I rejecting that creates this pattern? You might discover that you've disowned your anger. You've suppressed your healthy aggression. You've buried your warrior energy because somewhere along the way you learned that anger is bad, that conflict is dangerous, that being nice and accommodating is the only way to be safe and loved. So in your shadow work practice, you would visualize this anger. You would let it appear as a figure or a feeling or an image, and instead of pushing it away or being ashamed of it, you would talk to it. You would ask it what it wants, what it needs, what it's trying to protect you from. And you might discover that this anger isn't actually trying to hurt anyone. It's trying to protect you. It's trying to establish boundaries. It's trying to say this far and no further. It's your inner warrior that you've been locking in the basement. And when you finally acknowledge it, welcome it, integrate it, you don't become an angry person who's always exploding on others. You become someone who can access healthy anger when it's needed, someone who can set clear boundaries without guilt, someone who can say no and mean it, someone who can protect themselves and the people they love without apologizing for it. Or let's say you struggle with scarcity, with never feeling like you have enough money, enough time, enough love, enough success, and no matter how much you achieve or acquire, there's always this gnawing feeling of lack, this fear that it's all going to be taken away, this inability to relax and enjoy what you have. When you do shadow work around scarcity, you might discover that you've disowned your own greed, your own desire, your own healthy selfishness, because somewhere along the way, you learn that wanting things is bad, that desiring more than you have is ungrateful or selfish or wrong. Maybe you grew up in a religious environment that valorized poverty or sacrifice. Maybe you absorbed the message that good people don't care about money or material things. Maybe you learned to feel guilty for having desires and needs and wants. So all that healthy self-interest, all that natural desire for abundance and pleasure and enjoyment got pushed into the shadow where it turned, into its distorted form, into the feeling of never having enough, because you won't let yourself have what you want. You won't give yourself permission to want it in the first place. When you integrate this shadow, when you reclaim your desire, your greed, your selfishness as healthy and natural, you don't become a greedy person who's never satisfied. You become someone who can enjoy abundance without guilt, who can desire things without shame, who can pursue their goals without apologizing for wanting success. And paradoxically, that's when the abundance actually starts flowing, because you're no longer blocking it with your unconscious guilt about wanting it. The Jungian analyst Robert Johnson talks about something he calls owning your own shadow, and he gives this powerful example. He says, imagine you're walking down the street and you see someone do something that triggers you, that makes you angry or judgmental or disgusted, and your immediate reaction is to think, what's wrong with that person? How could they do that? I would never do something like that. That reaction, that judgment, that certainty that you're different from them is a sure sign that you're looking at your own shadow, that you're seeing in them something you've disowned in yourself. And Johnson says the practice is to catch yourself in that moment of judgment and ask, where in my life do I do that same thing? Maybe not in the same way or to the same degree, but where do I have that same quality that I'm judging in them? And when you can find it in yourself, when you can own it and acknowledge it and say, yes, I too have the capacity for that behavior. I too contain that quality. Something shifts, the charge dissolves, the judgment falls away, and you can see that person with compassion instead of contempt. You can recognize them as a mirror instead of as an enemy. And in that moment of recognition, you've integrated a piece of your shadow. You've reclaimed a part of yourself. You've become more whole. This is the forbidden power I'm talking about. This is the ancient technique that transforms everything. It's not about becoming perfect or transcending your humanity, or ascending to some higher dimension where you don't have to deal with the messy reality of being human. It's about becoming fully human, about embracing all of what you are, about integrating every quality, every capacity, every aspect of consciousness that you contain. And when you do that, when you stop fighting yourself and start becoming yourself, you access powers that were always there but were locked away in the shadow. You access your creativity because you're no longer censoring yourself. You access your authentic voice because you're no longer performing for others. You access your intuition because you're no longer only listening to your rational mind. You access your life force energy because you're no longer suppressing your sexuality and your wildness. You access your manifestation abilities because you're no longer unconsciously sabotaging yourself. You access your psychic abilities because you're no longer afraid of your own power. You access your capacity for deep intimacy because you're no longer hiding parts of yourself from others. You access your leadership because you're no longer playing small to make others comfortable. You access your sovereignty because you're no longer looking outside yourself for permission to be who you truly are. The ancient Greeks had a word for this integrated state. They called it sophrosyne, which is often translated as temperance or moderation, but really means something much deeper. It means having access to the full range of human experience and expression, having integrated both your divine and your animal nature, both your light and your dark, both your masculine and your feminine, both your child self and your adult self, and being able to dance between these polarities with wisdom and grace, choosing in each moment what's appropriate rather than being unconsciously driven by the parts of yourself you haven't integrated. The mystery schools of ancient Greece, the Eleusinian mysteries, the Orphic mysteries, the Pythagorean brotherhood, they were all teaching variations of this same forbidden knowledge, this same understanding that the path to divine consciousness goes through the underworld, not around it, that you must die before you can be reborn, that you must face your shadow before you can claim your light, and the initiations they put people through, the trials they designed, they were all aimed at one thing: breaking down the ego's defenses, stripping away the persona, the mask, the false self, and forcing the initiate to confront everything they'd been running from, everything they'd been denying, everything they'd pushed into the shadow, because only through that confrontation, only through that integration could they access the mysteries, the direct experience of unity consciousness, of divine awareness, of gnosis. Now here's where this gets even more interesting, even more forbidden. When you integrate your shadow, when you reclaim the parts of yourself you've disowned, you don't just change your internal experience, you change your external reality. And I'm not talking about manifestation in the superficial, think positive thoughts, and you'll get a new car sense. I'm talking about something much deeper and more profound. The physicist David Bohm, working with the insights of quantum mechanics, proposed something he called the implicate order, which is the idea that there's a deeper level of reality beneath the surface appearance of things, a level where everything is interconnected, where consciousness and matter are not separate, but are different aspects of the same fundamental reality. And what he suggested is that our consciousness, our awareness, our psychological state, doesn't just perceive reality, it actually participates in creating reality. It literally influences what unfolds in the physical world. And if that's true, and quantum mechanics certainly suggests that it is with phenomena like the observer effect and wave function collapse, then when you change your internal state through shadow integration, when you literally become a different person by reclaiming rejected aspects of yourself, you're not just changing how you interpret reality. You're changing the reality itself that you're experiencing. You're shifting to a different timeline, a different probability stream, a different version of the universe where different things are possible. The mystics have always known this. The shamans have always worked with this. The mystery schools have always taught this. That consciousness creates reality, that your internal state determines your external experience, that as within so without is not just a metaphor, but a literal description of how the universe works. And when you integrate your shadow, when you stop projecting your unconscious content onto the world, and instead take responsibility for it, own it, embrace it, transform it, you literally change the holographic field of consciousness that's generating your experience, and things that were impossible before become possible. Synchronicities increase, opportunities appear, people show up, doors open, and it's not magic in the sense of violating natural law. It's magic in the sense of working with natural law at a level that most people don't understand, at the level of consciousness itself, at the level where thought and matter, mind and reality are still one thing before they've separated into subject and object, observer and observed. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Bardo Thodol, it's essentially an instruction manual for shadow integration, for facing everything you've been running from, because the Tibetan Buddhists understood that what you don't integrate in life, you will face in death, that the bardos, the intermediate states between death and rebirth, are essentially encounters with your own mind, your own projections, your own shadow content appearing as terrifying demons and wrathful deities. And if you haven't done the work while you're alive, if you haven't learned to recognize these appearances as projections of your own consciousness, then you'll be overwhelmed by them. You'll be driven by fear and attachment and aversion into another unconscious rebirth, another cycle of suffering. But if you have done the work, if you've integrated your shadow, if you've learned to see through the appearances to the empty, luminous nature of mind itself, then you can recognize these appearances for what they are. You can navigate the bardos consciously, and you can either achieve liberation or choose your next rebirth deliberately, consciously, rather than being thrown into it by unconscious karmic forces. So let me leave you with this. The shadow self you've been running from your entire life, the parts of yourself you've denied and suppressed and hidden away. They're not your enemy. They're not something to be ashamed of. They are you. They're the missing pieces of your wholeness, and they're holding the key to everything you've ever wanted. Your power, your freedom, your authenticity, your truth. The ancient technique I've shared with you today, this practice of descending into your own underworld, of meeting your shadow with love instead of fear, of integrating what you've rejected. This is not just spiritual practice. This is the great work. This is the hero's journey. This is what you came here to do. So I'm asking you now, are you ready? Are you ready to stop running, to turn around, to face what you've been avoiding? Are you ready to reclaim your power, to become whole, to access the forbidden knowledge that lives within your own being? Because it's there, waiting for you, calling you. Your shadow self holds the key, and all you have to do is have the courage to turn the lock. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this sacred work. And remember, the darkness is not your enemy, it's your teacher, and the only way out is through. Until next time, keep walking the path, keep doing the work, and keep awakening to who you truly are.